In 1848, gold was discovered in Mexico. 9 days later, the United States took all the gold and the northern half of Mexico. That is how the California Gold Rush began. I'm Peter Barnes, and this is 9 Days in California, the unexpected story of how the West was won. In the interest of historical accuracy, I promise to tell you just one lie. Spot the lie and you could win a prize at the end of the podcast. Guess wrong and you could win a prize before the end of the podcast if I like your answer enough. We are not a history department. We are a guy with a podcast and royal grammar when required. We have fun. Where was I? Oh yes, in 1848, gold was discovered in Mexico. 9 days later, the United States took all the gold and the northern half of Mexico. That is how the California Gold Rush began. It gets worse. January 24th, 1848 is a Monday. Workers are building a sawmill on a river in the Alta California part of Mexico. John Marshall sees gold flakes in the soil, and he does exactly what you or I would do. He picks up all the gold he can see and then looks around for more. He has no idea that there are another 750,000 pounds of gold in the California hills. He leaves the mill to tell the owner, John Sutter, about the gold. 9 days later was a Wednesday, February 2nd. In Guadalupe, Hidalgo, a town just north of Mexico City, negotiators agree on a treaty that ends the Mexican-American War. The U.S. has won almost every battle, and now the U.S. Army occupies Mexico City, so we take what we want. And we want the northern half of Mexico, which includes all the gold. 9 days. Wow, that was lucky. I mean, it had to be a coincidence, right? How could anyone know about the gold that fast? It's 1848. News traveled at the speed of horseback or boat or hiking. The telegraph reached from the East Coast out to St. Louis, but west of that there were no telephones, no trains, no Pony Express. The news of California gold took weeks to reach the governments involved. 1,800 miles to Mexico City and 3,000 miles to Washington, D.C. Can you imagine Mexico hearing about the gold before signing the treaty? They would never give up California. Why? Because they know what that looks like. It looks like 300 years before this, when Hernán Cortés conquered modern-day Mexico, stole all the Aztec gold he could get his hands on, and sent it home on Spanish ships. Mexico wouldn't want to see the American sequel of that movie, and they would suddenly have the best military that money could buy. But nobody knew about the gold in time, so lucky for us. Americans still wear the white hats, and this is the world's shortest history podcast, right? Or do you want to hear about how maybe it wasn't luck? Okay. A few years before the gold rush, the U.S. government conducted a mineral survey in Mexico, in Alta California, in gold country. In fact, the survey team spent a night or two on the American River at an outpost called New Helvetia, run by John Sutter, who would soon build the most famous sawmill in U.S. history. No, I am not freaking kidding you. And now you see where this is going. At best, I have to ask, did the United States government know about the gold before we went to war with Mexico? And at worst, I will conclude that the U.S. government did know about the gold and started a hasty war to take California before a settler tripped over the gold and started blabbing to his friends or paying his bar tab in gold flakes, which is exactly what happened. It's disorienting, yes? Questions arise like, 1. Was this taught in my history class? 2. How shady does this story get? And 3. Why should I trust this stupid podcast? The answers are, 1, you weren't taught the fun version. 2, this story gets very shady. And 3, you should not trust this stupid podcast. I promise you one lie. You trust me and you win no prize. More importantly, that promise just went off like a starter's pistol. People will check on me now. Historians, sleuths, puzzle lovers, conspiracy theorists, bloodhounds, there will be a posse on my tail, watching every move, turning over every rock, dusting for fingerprints, and keeping me in their crosshairs. They will be the judges of historical accuracy. Asterisk, I think that's how historians work anyway. I wouldn't know. I'm not a historian. I'm the prime suspect. In fact, I'm the perp. I've confessed. You will be the witness. The crime is a-comin', and you may want to take notes because, my friends, the game is afoot. Behold, I bring unto thee history version OMG, the whole carnival. Step right up and see the white Americans who were illegal aliens in Mexico. Over here are good men building a bad war forced by President Mullet McPants on fire. See the president's most useful fool get a payday worth hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. Look, the Democratic Party was pro-slavery. Behind this curtain is the Army general who was exiled twice. He was president 6 times at least, and had at least 3 left legs. It was a different world, and it was right here not long ago. To round things out, we will take an amazing ocean voyage of discovery, one of the best ever, I think. By the time we are done, the only blanks on your bingo card will be a map on the back of the Constitution and rodents of unusual size. We can't visit every carnival booth, so here's the plan. We will focus on 3 main characters and the territory they fought over. 2 of those characters are presidents. The third is a cartographer, a map maker. His name is John C. Fremont. If you want to see how we took our neighbor's goose 9 days after it laid the first golden egg, it helps to follow Fremont. Let's talk about the rules. At any time during the podcast, you can send in your guess with your contact information. 1 guess per person, please, so you might want to wait till the end. I'm going to pick winners from 3 different categories. Here are the prize categories so far. College-age people are a category. You don't have to be enrolled, you just have to be the right age. 18 to 22 for the college-age category. My motive is simple. You guys don't vote. That's a problem. This podcast features authorities making some bad decisions. To be fair, being a good authority is twice as hard as being a good person, which is harder than being a normal person. And there are endless incentives for authorities to fail, so voting reduces bad decisions by authorities. When you vote, you improve my life. High school age is also a category. Yes, you do have to be enrolled, and yes, I will check. You might have to know the stuff for a class, so hey, I'm happy to help you out with that. More importantly, you really should know something about a good prank by the time you're a senior. I hope those categories have fun, but my main target is category number 3, all other non-alien residents of planet Earth. Welcome aboard. You don't have to be poorly informed, but it does make my job easier. If you're well informed, or worse, a historian, all I can say is, neener, comma, you can't catch me. Yes, I'm going to regret that. Rules of conduct. In this podcast, when I say Americans or whites, I mean the U.S. citizens that the government represented. Clearly, Native Americans, Mexicans, and blacks also resided in America, so they were also American. But it's also clear that this meant nothing to most white Americans. Full disclosure, I'm as white as a peeled potato. If we want to get really ethnically specific, my slice of the white pie suffers a mass execution in this story. No trial, just bodies hanging in the public square. Nope, I am not upset about it. That happened. I'm here. You're here. We're just talking. That's good. I'll use the term Native American when I don't know which tribe is involved or if there are too many to name. I used to think that the term Native American was too many syllables that solved a mistake that wasn't a problem. And I was wrong. You know what? Want to know why? Right now, the second largest minority group in most U.S. states is from India. If we keep using the term Indian to refer to Native Americans, then we need to decide how to mislabel these new neighbors from India. Or we could practice pronouncing Ojibwa, Chumash, Siquan, Quinault, and Nisqually, and other names that clearly I have not practiced enough. I'm going to talk about we, us, they, and them to talk about Native Americans, Mexicans, blacks, and whites. And let's remember 2 things. First, the people in this story are all dead. All the heroes, all the villains, the regular folk, way dead. They died before your grandparents were born. Nobody listening to this podcast caused anything in the 1840s. None of us are guilty or worthy because of this history. So let's just put that gremlin in a jar of formaldehyde and stick it on a shelf where the children can't reach it. On the other hand, for everyone alive now in the U.S. and Mexico, I'll be talking about our inheritance. I'm talking not just culture and language. I'm talking land, wealth, identity, privilege, envy, and more. It runs deep, it surfaces daily, and it's immune to burial. See? Fun already. It's time to follow Fremont. John C. Fremont will take the lead in the fight for California and will be its military governor once California falls. Fremont represents 1840s America, and he does it well. He was smart and dumb, heroic and bumbling, clueless and lucky. He's a historical footnote, which sounds awful, but it's really quite an achievement. I don't measure up. If you're taking notes, it's spelled Fremont, F as in Foxtrot, R-E-M as in Michael, O-N-T as in Tango, and if you are taking precise notes, there is an accent mark over the E. This is the only character that we will follow from his beginnings. Everyone else will get a modest intro, and then we skip ahead to their juicy parts. You know, their contributions. If you want to fact check me on Fremont's life, there are plenty of resources online, or I recommend the book Imperfect Union by Steve Inskeep. Full title of the book, Imperfect Union: How Jesse and John Fremont Mapped the West, Invented Celebrity, and Helped Cause the Civil War. His book is rich and thoughtful, except for the ridiculously long title. My podcast, as you know, is the opposite. So, here's the podcast version. John C. Fremont was born a bastard. I used to think that meant that the parents weren't married. That's almost right. His mother was married. So, still a bastard, but worse. Worse yet, the Commonwealth of Virginia would not grant his mother a divorce. Her lover was John Fremont. No accent and no T at the end, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He was an immigrant who taught French for a living. The couple fled to Savannah, Georgia, where John C. Fremont was born in 1813. They were so poor that the father had to augment his income as a French teacher. He started teaching dance as well. 5 years later, he was dead. For historical context, this was also the year that Abraham Lincoln and Karl Marx were born. 3 years later, when Fremont was 8, the country of Mexico was born. Fremont will be at war with Mexico as an adult and will irritate the hell out of Lincoln by emancipating slaves prematurely and without permission. He won't have any interaction with Mr. Marx that we know of. When Fremont was 13, the fatherless family lived in Charleston, South Carolina. They were so poor that John had to leave school to earn money for the family. He got a job delivering subpoenas for an attorney. This was the first of many times that Fremont caught a lucky break. The short version is that the attorney saw Fremont's potential and paid for Fremont to return to school. In high school, Fremont learned Greek well enough to enjoy reading Greek classics. He will also teach French later. I've tried to learn another language. Twice. It didn't take, so yes, I am impressed with him, and language wasn't even his strong suit. Math was his forte. He found a textbook once on celestial navigation. It was written in Dutch, a language that he didn't understand, but he didn't need to. To him, the diagrams and equations were self-explanatory. At age 16, he entered the College of Charleston as a junior. That's how smart Fremont was. He just skipped 4 years of school. Of course, it's a new college and has fewer than 90 students, but still, he just has to complete 2 years of school to get his college degree. So, let's skip ahead 2 years and Fremont is expelled for missing too many classes. He was 18 and so in love that he spent all his time with his girlfriend instead of attending classes. That is an example of just how dumb Fremont was. He admits in his own writing that he just didn't care. By the way, he was 18, she was 14. Fremont was at loose ends for the next 2 years, so here's some context to put you in that 1830s mood. Just before Fremont's 19th birthday, another guy about the same age boarded a ship to spend 5 years at sea. It was a 22-year-old naturalist named Charles Darwin, leaving England aboard the HMS Beagle. He had sideburns but no beard, and he still had hair on top. On this journey, he will notice how different the finches were on each of the Galapagos Islands. It made him think, and think, and then write the origin of the species. He will claim that natural selection drives evolution. He was sure of it. He was also sure that people would be furious with him for suggesting that God had not created all of nature just the way it appeared in 1831, and he was right about both parts. It's time for Fremont's next lucky break. Joel Poinsett was a family friend and a recent ambassador to Mexico. He will be the next Secretary of War. Yes, before the Orwell fan club renamed it the Department of Defense, we had a War Department. It was an honest name for people for the people responsible for the grim business of killing people and breaking their things. They were led by Joel Poinsett, so naturally we named poinsettias after him. You know those Christmas plants with the red leaves on top and the green leaves on the bottom? So festive, so adorable. Poinsett got Fremont a job on the USS Natchez, teaching celestial navigation to the crew. Poinsett thought it was a waste of Fremont's talent. Fremont's next job was on another ship that sailed to the South American coast. He then helped survey a train route across the Appalachian Mountains. Next, he helped map Cherokee territory for the Army. The Army might need good battle maps if they had to force the Cherokee onto the Trail of Tears, which was their eviction from their ancestral homes on good farmland around Georgia to their banishment in Oklahoma. In 1838, Poinsett found Fremont a job in the Army Corps of Topographical Engineers. He was sent to the Midwest to work with Joseph Nicollet, a French emigre whose field work became a masterclass for Fremont. Nicollet and Fremont went out in the field again in 1839. They returned to Washington and began crafting their observations into better maps. Suddenly, quote, a mysterious figure appeared in the doorway. He was a man in black, in his late 50s, with a massive body that filled the doorframe, a full head of hair, and piercing blue eyes, end quote. That's how Steve Inskeep described Senator Thomas Hart Benton meeting Fremont for the first time. Senator Thomas Hart Benton was larger than life. In his career, he was a lawyer, a slaveholder, a newspaper editor, and a politician, and it makes sense that he could fill out a doorframe. He got kicked out of law school for stealing from his classmates. He got into a fistfight with a young Andrew Jackson. He killed a man in a duel once. The first duel was, in fact, it was the second time that these two men had dueled. The first one was at 30 feet, and Benton shot his opponent in the neck. And do you know why history is sometimes dull? Not enough carnival food. Pistol dueling, that is deep-fried history on a stick. No, it's not good for you. It's carnival food. It puts ideas in your head and ruins your appetite. But we are at the carnival, so... Do you want to know how gentlemen killed each other so politely that nobody called the cops? Okay, but you're going to have a stomachache afterwards. There were 26 rules to the Code Duello, D-U-E-L-L-O, which may be the most badass name for an actual code of conduct. Here are the highlights. The combatants are the primaries. Each primary must have a second, which is a friend of equal social rank. The first job of the second was to talk the primary out of the duel. The offended party sent the challenge through his second. The challenge could not be delivered at night. This gave everyone time to calm down, sleep off any alcohol, and think it over. If the accused party accepted, the accused chose the weapons, the challenger chose the place, and the seconds chose the time and the rules of engagement, like how many shots would be allowed, would there be a start signal, or what. Once the accused stood at the appointed spot, at least one shot had to be fired. No firing into the air or into the ground. That was considered being childish, and if you're going to go out onto a dueling ground, you're going to be a grown-up. You're going to face the music and the bullets. As a practical matter, you might bring more people than just your second. How about a doctor? How about enough people to dispose of your body? Most duels were with pistols, but the rules also apply to swords, short swords, and hunting knives. Wow! Hunting knives! I mean, how do you miss? When using pistols, if you pull the trigger and nothing happens, that still counts as your shot. If you manage to shoot your opponent, that's probably going to be the end of it for the day. Any injury that makes a person's hand shake so much that they can't aim accurately, that stops the proceedings for the day at least. Now, there are many offenses that might lead to a duel, but there are three that are called out in particular: striking a gentleman, calling a gentleman a liar, and insulting a woman under the care or protection of a gentleman. If a duel arises from the striking of a gentleman, shots will be fired regardless of any apologies or explanations that preceded. If the duel arises only from an accusation of lying, Rule 4 applies. Here's most of Rule 4. Quote, "The aggressor must either beg pardon in express terms, exchange 2 shots previous to apology, or 3 shots followed up by explanation, or fire on until a severe hit be received by one party or the other." End quote. By the 1840s, duels were being outlawed and were mostly a Southern practice. They were often done outside of city limits. Senator Thomas Hart Benton dueled both times on a sandbar in the river just outside of St. Louis. It was called Blood Island. As I said, the first duel was at 30 feet. I've read that the second one was at 9 feet, but man, that just sounds suicidally close. Most pistol duels did not end in death or injury. At the right distance, pistols were inaccurate. Plus, once the go signal was given, speed was important, and that does not improve your aim. Your opponent will be less accurate if you can shoot him first, so that's kind of the goal. Some duels could be stopped if someone was injured enough to satisfy the other guy's honor. So the rules allowed for killing, but they seemed to prefer sound and fury over fatality. Of course, the rules also provided for a double feature. If the seconds offended each other, they could also duel at the same time. Same time as the principals. They would form a square, principals facing off at opposite corners, and the seconds firing at the same time from the other 2 corners of the square. Andrew Jackson was such a hothead that he fought around 100 pistol duels and was injured multiple times. Most of his duels started because of comments about his wife. He only killed 1 man that we know of, and it was only because he violated the code duello. His gun jammed. That should have been the end of it. Instead, he fixed the problem, aimed, and killed his opponent. Interestingly, Jackson was a military man and a war hero, so he'd spent his lifetime around guns. His dueling record is amazing. 100 duels, only 1 killed because he cheated. There's a decent argument to be made that the code duello saved lives. Still, some practices don't survive in a civil society. Dueling is one of them. The rules were gentlemanly, but the act was savage. So if someone today plans to Uber over to Murder Island, if they want to kill some troll with a dueling Uzi, it's a bad idea. It starts out as Romulus and Remus. It ends as Cain and Abel, and plenty of us will testify against the winner. Welcome to civilization. See? That's me being your wingman. And now we lock up your Uzi in your gun safe, which is just below the gremlin in the jar. Can I get you some decaf? So, Thomas Hart Benton joins our story as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Military Affairs. More than anything, Benton was a true believer in U.S. westward expansion. He could probably pronounce it, too. He used all available tools to push, pull, and coax the country all the way to the Pacific coast. Today, there are 3 states on our west coast: Washington, Oregon, and California. Back then, there were 0. There was the Oregon Territory and Mexico. Oregon Territory was administered by both the United States and England. Nobody knew if the Oregon Territory would join England's Canada colony or join the U.S. Senator Benton wanted the westbound lanes of the Oregon Trail full of pioneers and dotted with forts. In reality, the Oregon Trail was poorly mapped and dangerous for newbies. Benton knew the recipe for baking a new state from scratch. Find a suitable territory and fill it with American settlers who will farm, ranch, mine, and mill. Stir in patriotic sentiments, add a dash of external threat to taste, and stick it in the congressional oven for approval. If the Oregon Territory was stuffed with enough Americans, England would lose its appetite for governing it. England had tried to govern Americans. It didn't work. More Americans might go west if they had better maps and inspiring success stories. Senator Benton could use Fremont to deliver both. But first, they have to get to know each other. Fremont will spend time at Benton's home in D.C., talking about the West, maps, politics, and noticing Benton's daughter, Jessie. Fremont was smitten. He was 27 years old and poor. She was 16, and she was not poor. When her mother caught the first whiff of romance in the air, Fremont was surprised to learn that he had to leave right now to go spend the rest of the summer surveying the Des Moines River. What can you say? When a river is ready for surveying, you can't just keep it waiting. Young Jessie Benton was also sent away to spend time with relatives in Virginia. That is an excellent way to head off disaster. If your daughter's boyfriend is too old and too poor, simply have your husband, have the military, call this young suitor to duty 1,000 miles away. This would have made Pride and Prejudice a much faster read. For John C. Fremont and Jessie Benton, it didn't work. In October, they eloped. What an idiot. Him, not her. It turns out that she didn't even know his age. She was young, and you moron! For the second time in his life, John C. Fremont was so in love that he happily drove his life into a ditch. He didn't even elope right. They married in secret, and then she continued living with her parents, and he remained in his insufficient quarters. If there were a code elopo, it would require that the couple run off and get married, or get married and run off. Either way, the running off part is kind of important, and it's going to save a lot of people's lives. Clearly, Fremont did not have a second who would tell him, her daddy is going to kill you, from 9 feet away. He's not only the boss of you, he is the boss of your entire chain of command. A couple of weeks later, they told her parents. Senator Benton was furious. He did not kill anybody that we know of. Long story short, John C. Fremont moved into the Benton home to live with his wife and his new in-laws. Months later, Senator Benton had still not killed Fremont. Spoiler alert, he never does. It was New Year's Day. Benton pulled Fremont aside for a chat about the Oregon Territory, the Oregon Trail, the need for settlers, and how Fremont could shape history. Unlike Fremont, Benton could map out the future and bring that future to life. In that future, pioneers had better maps which made the Oregon Trail a little less dangerous, and the safer journey needed publicity. In 1842, newspapers were the only mass communication. Benton had been a newspaper editor. He knew all about publicity. So, before you know it, Fremont is leading his first mapping expedition to the West. The last thing Fremont did before leaving St. Louis was spend Army money without permission. He basically said, hey, put it on the Army's tab, I work for them, and he got into some trouble for that. The expedition went well. He mapped the rivers the Army was interested in, and then he went a little farther west to South Pass, a part of the Oregon Trail. And we pause here because people write that in the Rocky Mountains, Fremont made a bad choice. And I say, really? And I mean every word of that. These people, and I mean people who write history, write that Fremont was rash and irresponsible when he took a few days' detour to climb the tallest mountain peak he had ever seen. His expedition team was already exhausted and low on supplies. They were eating whatever they could hunt, and there's nothing to hunt on a 13,500-foot summit. There was snow on the mountain and ice. They had no climbing gear. The summit slab was about 3 feet wide. Fremont recalled that the fall would have been endless. He had altitude sickness, which features exhaustion, headaches, nausea, and vomiting. A German cartographer and his party slid 200 feet down and only stopped after smacking into a boulder. Fremont has already disappointed Senator Benton once. Benton not only forgave him, Benton gave Fremont a future. Why risk disappointing Benton again by dying on a dangerous and unnecessary adventure? Fremont also knows at this point that his wife is pregnant. It's time to act like an adult. And when I write it out like that, in a very thin-lipped, no-nonsense, sans serif font, I have to agree with these writer people, but only on the very narrow grounds that they are right. Mostly. Still, And I'm in no way endorsing Mr. Fremont's poor decision-making skills. It's understandable, right? Think of it this way. The highest peak in the country at the time was Mount Mitchell in North Carolina, which was about 6,700 feet. That elevation makes Coloradans say, really, It makes the Swiss roll their eyes, and it makes Nimsdai Perja smile impishly at the things that pass for mountains in North America. And if you've ever seen the documentary 14 Peaks, Peaks, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, remember that Fremont has spent over a month staring at flat land and the butt of the mule in front of him. You know what that is? That's dum da dee da dum da dee da dum da dee da dum da dee da dum da, mile after mile. It's the only tune that mules know except for flatulence. So Fremont sees a magnificent peak that is about twice as high as Mount Mitchell, and it's right there. He has traveled 2,000 miles to be right there. He might not ever be back. Benton wants some adventure stories? Let's send the rest of the expedition ahead. Me and some of the boys need to try for a summit. Mountains affect some men like gold affects the rest of us. It's like men in cars or campfires or grills. Potato, potato. Ernest Hemingway wrote that mountaineering was one of only 3 true sports. The English mountaineer George Mallory was asked why he wanted to climb the tallest mountain in the world. Mallory's famous reply was, because it's there. And guys just kind of understand that. It was either John Muir or Clarence King, I can't remember, who had difficulty writing about his first trip into the Sierra Nevada because he kept overusing the word glorious. Fremont was affected in the same way. He wrote at length about the climb because around 13,000 feet, the trip from trail to a bare rocky summit is utter drama. Fremont rode above where the trees can grow. He left his mules. Up there, hiking means panting. Massive stone slabs are rising into the sky all around you. There's danger and exhilaration until you reach the summit where you are just awestruck. Your lungs, your legs, and the view announce what you've accomplished. And your mind produces little malformed thoughts that bounce between the sacred and the profane. Everything else is stripped away. It's either, this is the playground of the gods, or, did I bring toilet paper? Nothing else makes you feel so big or so small, and so small at the same time. Fremont's notes recall the silence. He also recalls a bumblebee arriving, and his little malformed thought was that this must be the first bumblebee to ever land on the summit. I bet that part of Fremont's trip inspired more men than would admit it. I have no evidence to back it up, but I imagine that men who had lived decades of dum-da-dee-da, dum-da-doo-da, dum-da-dee, they read this account and decided that the Oregon Trail was calling them. And about 2/3 of you just said, really? And I'd say that you're probably right. Fremont did raise an American flag on the peak, and he and his fellow climbers joined the rest of the expedition for the journey home. And in 1924, George Mallory died on Mount Everest. When Fremont returned home, he was full of memories, notes, and feelings from the trip. He had a terrible time sitting and writing the report. He just couldn't do it. He wound up telling the chronology to his young wife, Jessie, and it turns out that woman could write. She also knew the version her father wanted. She and her father just had an uncommon bond. They just got each other. The report was not only factual, it was full of anecdotes that made people want to hit the trail for themselves. Sunrises on the prairie, the camaraderie of the trail, the friendly encounters with the Native Americans, it was all there, encouraging the hesitant to pioneer a new life in the Oregon Territory. The maps from the trip were drawn by George Preuss, the German fellow who did that 200-foot slide down the side of the mountain. He also thought that Fremont was a great big American man-child. Preuss's maps showed settlers where they could find water, good grazing, woods, what kind of soil types, and more. The report and the maps were submitted to the Army chain of command, but parts of the report were also sent to a few key newspapers. I wonder who did that. People were eager to read about the adventure. Other newspapers picked up the story. Readers had no way of knowing all the ingredients that led to the story. But for you and me, in hindsight, it looks a bit like a staged production, you know? Starring John C. Fremont, edited by Jesse Fremont, produced by Senator Thomas Hart Benton, paid for by the U.S. Army. By the way, there are many gold nuggets in Steve Inskeep's book, Imperfect Union. One of my favorites, is a quote from Jessie Fremont, writing about her childhood encounters with all kinds of people and cultures around the Mississippi, which was the far western United States at the time. She wrote that the experience helped her, quote, to comprehend the necessary differences and equal merits of differing people, and although different, each could be right, end quote. I am seriously tempted to bring her back to life just to hire her. Podcasters have powers, you know. That's it for episode 1. In our next episode, Fremont is a media star. The president has a mullet. And you get a little high on gold. Thanks for listening.